Good morning. It's Monday, the 27th of May, and this is Govindraj Ethiraj broadcasting and streaming from and headquartered in Mumbai, India's financial capital. Our top stories and themes for this day and week. The markets are still sailing away, 6 more trading sessions to election results. The man who predicted Dow hitting 40,000 in 2016 and India's own Rakesh Jhunjhunwala predicting Nifty at 100,000 in 2030. Betting apps, the new breed of misleading advertisements going for your wallet. And the Singapore Airlines incident. Could climate change increase the number of instances of air turbulence? An active pilot's view.
This is a call report with Govindraj Ethiraj.
The stock market sailing away. June 4th is just 6 trading sessions away, being the point the results of India's 2024 general elections will be declared, and the present stress levels around where the stock market might or might not go will hopefully end and fresh ones will take over. Because that is the nature of the markets, which tend to swing from macro worries to micro ones quite swiftly and before you know it. So if quarterly results are steady, as they mostly have been, then the focus will be on political outcomes and, of course, vice versa. When the markets were very sure of the political outcomes, as they were a few weeks ago, then the focus would be or will be back on companies and sectoral performance. At this point, after a bout or bouts of jitteriness, the markets are once again betting on political continuity. Now, there are, of course, questions on what one should do if the markets go one way or the other on June 4th for whatever reason. Remember, markets can fall even if there is a BJP victory, if for some reason the absolute number of seats clinched is seen as below expectations, which of course have been set by the BJP itself. Actually, you have to see what foreign institutional investors are doing, which is selling right now and going by the general wisdom ascribed to them, which is to take profits off the table right now and then come back on June 4th or after to buy. Because they do believe in the long-term story and are okay to take the chance of buying a little more expensively were the markets to shoot up on the 4th of June. Once again, Indian markets are at record highs, and I will come to the latest numbers in a moment, which means quite logically that if you've been invested in the market for a year, for example, then you would have most likely have earned good profits. That is, if you've invested wisely. Actually, even if you've invested unwisely. Anyway, so we have only 6 trading sessions to go. On Friday, equities hit fresh record highs for the second straight day. The BSE Sensex touched a new high of 75,636. in intraday trade, and the Nifty 50 crossed the 23,000 mark to hit a new high of 23,026. The Sensex finally closed at 75,410 points, just 8 points down, while the Nifty was down 11 points at 22,957. So the range is a little narrow. To come back to foreign portfolio investors, if you want to look at their strategy more closely, in 2024, they have net sold about 19,824 crores worth of shares, but invested 46,900 crores, almost 47,000 crores in the debt markets. We've talked about the debt markets and how they've become more attractive and lucrative after India was included in several bond indices globally. Now, foreign investors have been selling quite heavily in the last 3 months, including about 22,000 crores in May so far, after investing aggressively in the months before that. Hence, it netted off to about 19,000 crores of negative. Now, in general and in specific, I can tell you, or rather remind you, since we've been talking about it quite often here, that leading foreign institutional investors, including the likes of brokerages like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan, amongst many others, have all indicated that they are bullish on India in the medium and long term. Meanwhile, don't forget Wall Street, because that is setting the global equity market sentiment. On Friday, the Nasdaq closed at a fresh record high as gains in chipmaker Nvidia outweighed worries that the Federal Reserve will delay interest rate cuts, said CNBC. The Standard & Poor's rose too, while the Dow Jones was at about 39,000, below that historic 40,000 mark it hit last week. The Dow has actually lost about 2.5%, marking its first negative week in 5 weeks. So chipmaker Nvidia, whose blockbuster results we spoke of last week, rose 15% in just that last week, thanks to better than expected quarterly earnings reports. CNBC reported that Nvidia's shares topped $1,000 for the first time last week on those earnings. Meanwhile, a stock that you may not have heard of as a stock in a while, though its brand and product you must have seen around and in India, Dell Technologies hit a record high on Friday, The reason, it was lifted in a rally in companies working on generative artificial intelligence applications. So Dell too is rising on AI hopes. A small story of optimism and hope. David Elias, now 79 years old, predicted in a 1999 book, Dow 40,000 Strategies for Profiting from the Greatest Bull Market in History, and he predicted that the index would cross that milestone by 2016. Obviously, he missed that mark by 8 years, but the forecast was better late than never, he told Wall Street Journal. The 30 stock index crossed 40,000 in intraday trading for the first time on May 16th and then closed above the mark the following day, as we just mentioned, and of course it's retreated a little since then. Now, Elias's prediction failed to account for several things, including the 2000 dot-com bust and the 2008 financial crisis, both of which pulverized Wall Street. Now, the Wall Street says Elias is already out with a hot new take. He expects the Dow to hit 67,000 in the next 10 years. So that's 67,000 by 2034. He said that he was 100% confident and that artificial intelligence was one of the reasons he felt that way. To come back home, the late and legendary investor Rakesh Jhunjhunwala had predicted in 2021 that the Nifty would touch 90 to 100,000 by 2030 or 6 years' time from now. India will surprise on the upside. I can't tell you the depth or direction as it depends on so many factors, is what he said then in an interview on television. Well, who knows? Meanwhile, the rupee is on a strongish wicket. It strengthened by the most in about 5 months, even as equities hit record highs, and thanks to that larger than expected dividend payout to the government. The rupee rose as much as 0.3% to 83 rupees 3 paise, so about 83 rupees that is, against the dollar on Friday, the most since December 15th as markets reopened after being shut on Thursday, according to Bloomberg. The Reserve Bank of India's $25 billion payout to the government, or more than 200,000 crores, which is almost double than what was budgeted, is also boosting sentiment as those funds could be used to finance more spending. Oil, meanwhile, is holding near 3-month lows as the markets are seeing lower geopolitical risks even as supply levels seem strong. So Brent crude was quoting a shade over $82 a barrel over the weekend. Brent is still up about 7% this year, though it's fallen since mid-April, reported Bloomberg. How betting advertisements are going for your wallet. Now, to move on to advertising and how a good part of it is not what it sounds like or looks like, and why that's important for business and consumers. The Advertising Standards Council of India last week published the annual complaints report looking at advertisements that were considered objectionable for the last year, which is 23-24. ASCI, as it's called, says they looked at about 10,000 complaints and investigated about 8,300 of them. Interestingly, almost 50% of the advertisements picked up by ASCI were not contested by the advertisers. And a total of 98% of cases eventually required modification as they violated the ASCI codes. The majority of violations were on account of misleading claims at 81%, followed by ads that promoted harmful situations or products at 34%. Not surprisingly, digital ads accounted for 85% of ads processed, said ASCI, which says that this obviously raises serious questions about the online safety of consumers, as has been highlighted by them in the past as well. Also, 94% of those advertisements that were processed on digital were picked up suo moto by ASCI, which means no one really complained, but ASCI picked them up as they usually do. Now, we have in the past spoken of healthcare being the most violative sector, contributing to 19% of cases. But the sector that follows closely after is illegal offshore betting at 17%. Now, this is a surprise and suggests a larger problem in an area that we may not have really focused on and which obviously goes beyond advertising. To get a general sense on what ASCI has been picking on from their side in the last year and how they were geared for the workload ahead, I reached out to Manisha Kapoor, CEO of ASCI and a frequent guest on our show. And I began by asking her about those illegal betting advertisements and what their rise signified.
The reason it's called illegal is obviously because betting and gambling is not permitted in most parts of the country. And therefore, it stands that a category itself, which is banned, cannot advertise. Now, we are seeing a lot of ads that are related to this category. And many of them, in fact, most of them are basically offshore companies. So these companies are not registered in India. They don't pay taxes in India, but they are able to access Indian consumers, by being, of course, mainly on digital platforms. And we see that they use a lot of celebrities. They use, very prominent personalities to attract people. And One of the challenges we face, in this area is that many of them actually don't have a contact number or an email ID or just an office in India. So connecting with these people is very difficult, although obviously they have figured ways to connect with everyone and the Indian audiences. So that's one of the challenges. And also because of these kind of issues, really the only way to address this is for the government to act to perhaps close down these sites. I mean, they can do their own investigation and take down these sites. Unlike misleading ads, etc., which need investigation, in this case, it is a clear case of something which is happening, which is not permitted by law. So we work quite closely with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting on this. We have, based on our conversations and requests from them, brought all of these ads to their attention. And they, along with certain other departments, are working together to, resolve these kind of challenges and take down these ads.
You said that not permitted in some states and it is permitted in some states. I mean, is that for local gambling or how does that work?
Yeah, so most states in India, I think barring 2 or 3 states in the Northeast, prevent, gambling or betting. Now, online gaming is permitted in most parts of the country, but betting and gambling, which are pure games of chance as per the definition, are not permitted. So therefore, the advertising of these also, is not really permitted, because if a product is banned, it follows that its advertising is not permitted.
And the reason we are seeing these ads in India, and I'm still talking about betting, is because they're being distributed by platforms like Google.
All sorts of platforms, they have their own websites as well. And, their ads are kind of all over the place. So, a lot of them are on their own websites as well.
Got it. So now you respond to complaints. So are people complaining that these are illegal or is this suo moto?
So most of this is suo moto. So in fact, if you see our complaints report, we have close to 80% of our work that we take up is actually suo moto in nature. And of the ads that actually get processed, because a lot of complaints that sometimes come in may not necessarily relate to advertising. So in fact, from a processing point of view, over 90% of the ads that eventually get processed are picked up by ASCI, ourselves, in terms of our own proactive monitoring. And most of these, likewise, come from our proactive monitoring.
Right. And you're also seeing a lot of celebrity advertisements, or rather celebrities who are not evidently doing their diligence before, let's say, endorsing a certain product. I mean, any thoughts on why that's not changing despite the fact that it's now all under very strong scrutiny and gaze?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think, just, I guess, the culture, being careful and cautious and, the responsibility that they have towards their audiences, which is perhaps lacking. And I think what we are seeing, when we ask for evidence of due diligence is usually where they have a contract with the advertiser where the advertiser promises to indemnify them. But, that indemnity is different from due diligence. Due diligence is required under the law as well, where, the claims that are being made in the ad need to be something which the endorser verifies. Now, we don't expect them to be experts in different categories, given just the width of things that endorsers promote in India. But they need to then get in an expert, take an expert opinion, and see whether the claims that they have made in the ads are true or not. The law has a separate liability for endorsers and a separate liability for advertisers. And the endorsers can kind of, if they have demonstrated evidence of due diligence, then they will not be liable under the law. Otherwise, they can be fined and even barred from endorsement. So, the penalties are quite strong. I'm sure, as and when the government identifies a few cases to bring on the full force of the law, perhaps people will become more careful, which is a little unfortunate because, the law already exists and, celebrities and all other endorsers should already be very careful about what they say. So, that is really the legal liability. And there is also, I think, just the moral responsibility because, they are addressing an audience that is probably coming to the brand based on their trust. And if you kind of let that be exploited, that's really not a great thing.
Yeah. And last question. So, you looked at over 10,000 complaints, investigated over 8,000 advertisements. Now, how are you resourced to do all of this, Manisha, in terms of people, and how is it distributed or centralized?
So there are two things to this. One is that we, of course, have an internal team, which, is over the years has developed a great deal of expertise in being able to monitor and track ads and also be able to recognize and pick up violations very, very efficiently. So, that's one. So our team is, 15, 16 people who work on this exclusively. We also, over the past few years, have now started to use technology to be able to help us with this. So we are using certain AI systems and also tie up with, data providers like TAM, who provide us with feeds from television and print, which then, so we have trained their teams as well to be able to identify some violations prima facie, and they come to us, and then of course our team will scrutinize them more thoroughly and shortlist, the cases from there. So it is a combination of an external party that is helping us, software that we are working on, and of course, I would say a really efficient and effective team. I think going forward, we will continue to lean on technology. We are already exploring and piloting newer technologies that can help us scale up, particularly, I think, on digital, where the universe is infinite. How do we kind of focus our priorities and shortlist efficiently the cases that we want to take forward?
Right. Manisha, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks, Govind.
Could climate change increase cases of air turbulence? Now, there is not enough data on impact of climate change on many things, including air turbulence, except that we all know that climatic conditions are changing and changing more than ever before, even at 37,000 feet above sea level, and that will impact aircraft flying at that altitude, particularly if they encounter sudden bursts of unexpected turbulence. Passengers on Singapore Airlines flight SQ321 faced a nightmarish situation on May 21st or last week when their flight was hit by severe turbulence on the way from London to Singapore. The aircraft encountered that turbulence much closer to its destination and then had to be diverted to Bangkok. A 73-year-old British man died in that incident, and reports suggest that 71 people were injured, and many quite severely, including spinal cord injuries arising most likely from hitting the top of that aircraft. Now, there is much literature on why turbulence can occur, but if you are a frequent flyer, then you might want to listen to what's coming up. Equally, you will find which routes are more likely to face turbulence, for example, around Japan and parts of Latin America, but that's been known. Because while turbulence can be sudden, the latest generation of commercial airliners may be better equipped to see what's coming. And of course, it also depends on how pilots interpret those colors on those weather radar screens in front of them in the cockpit. So as a passenger, you can obviously only ensure that you're wearing seat belts at most times. But to come back to climate change and why perhaps it's a little more important to be belted up today than ever before, I reached out to Captain Amit Singh, an active Airbus A320 pilot and also founder of Delhi-based Safety Matters Foundation. And I began by asking him how he was looking at the Singapore Airlines incident now that a few days had passed and there was more information and insights at hand.
So the initial reports were that the aircraft, a Boeing 777, encountered severe turbulence or extreme turbulence. So intensity would only come out after the flight data is downloaded and analyzed. But seeing the injuries, it is extreme turbulence. Over the past few days, nothing official has come out because for an official statement, preliminary investigation, they need some more time, at least a month typically, to analyze the data. But if during the course of investigation, they come to know of anything which is critical affecting safety, they normally release a statement or a circular for the pilots or some advice. But nothing of that sort has come out. We can only depend on what data is available in the public domain, that is flight radar data, and a number of satellites, weather satellites, which have been tracking weather in that particular region. So from that, we can come to not a definite conclusion, but it is an indication that the turbulence was related to something of an environmental factor, not a technical issue. Because in any investigation, first, they like to know if it is a technical failure or not. So that can be easily eliminated, partially so, because it is a weather-related phenomena. And the pilots have a weather radar which depicts the weather ahead. It basically depends on them how to analyze and interpret the data and take evasive action. There is no warning which that weather radar gives in terms of an audio or a visual. It only gives color-coded picture. Where there is heavy turbulence, it will give purple or magenta. Then detects basically amount of moisture in the air, because a cloud is associated with the moisture and the heavier rainfall parts are associated with the red color the lesser are yellow, and the least is green. So that's how sort of data is presented to the pilots. Then both the pilots decide on the course of action depending on the prevailing wind, which side to divert, whether to divert or not to divert. So all that would have happened. So only a cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder would conclusively tell what actually happened. But there is, with a reasonable amount of accuracy, we can predict that it is environmental factor.
Right. So this was flying at 37,000 feet from what I can see, and then it dropped suddenly. So you're saying that even at that height, aircraft could encounter that level of turbulence or that level of weather?
Yeah, typically big thunderstorm cells can go up to 39,000 feet. And even if it is a developing thunderstorm, which in that region, it develops very fast because the land mass gets heated up and then you have enough moisture from the sea. So typically the clouds form very fast. Within 15, 20 minutes, they'll rise to 25, 30,000 feet. Since they're developing, so in a cloud, typically there are strong updrafts and on the outside, and then the air descends towards the middle. So updrafts and downdrafts. So even if you're flying over the cloud and the cloud is below you, there would be turbulence because that air is disturbed because of a growing mushroom cloud. So it can throw an aircraft, even though the pilots might think that we are well above or safely above the cloud, but still it is recommended to avoid development. So modern weather radars have that facility, which gives a warning of a developing thunderstorm. Since this was a 16-year-old aircraft, this would not have that facility or that feature in the weather radar, which gives a warning of a developing thunderstorm and not to overfly.
Right. That's interesting. So, and you're saying that, or rather, would you say that this has nothing to do with the size of the aircraft? I mean, and of course, I'll come to the manufacturer in a moment, but let's say this is a 777, and let's say you fly 320s, Airbus A320. So it's not like, I mean, it's more to do with the age of the aircraft and the latest avionics rather than how big it is or how it was built at one time.
The Boeing 777 is a very sturdy aircraft. It deals very well with turbulence. And that is probably the reason why structurally there was no issue. A 320 probably would have been thrown up much more, a lighter aircraft. So this was a heavier aircraft and more sturdy. The avionics were, of course, old. So there was a Indigo 320 7 minutes behind this aircraft. That would have a more advanced weather radar. And that Indigo deviated north apparently to avoid this particular thunderstorm. There was a Singapore Airlines 777, 15 minutes behind, coming from Charles de Gaulle, Paris. That also deviated north. There was one Swiss Air aircraft which departed from Bangkok. That again deviated. That took off 1 hour before. So apparently this cloud activity had started an hour before. That is the reason the Swiss Air deviated. So there was something. Why were the aircraft deviating? Otherwise, all the aircraft would have followed the airway straight. So this one in particular, for whatever reasons, be it crew fatigue, they were 10 hours into the flight and it is a long flight. I don't know what their previous patterns was, and was the crew kind of not very sharp in interpreting and not very fast in aviation. So that we'll come to know only once the investigation is over. But clearly, this was the only aircraft which flew straight. Every other aircraft deviated. Had it been the normal turbulence, clear air turbulence, that doesn't affect this smaller pocket. That would affect the general area and all the levels would be affected. So all the aircrafts would have encountered. So why was this aircraft the only aircraft which encountered turbulence? Towards Japan and US, it is very common, and towards Middle East. But then all aircraft are affected on that particular route. In this particular case, only one aircraft was affected. So it is not clear air turbulence, which the radar cannot detect and the pilots cannot see. There was definitely something which either the pilots could not interpret or the weather radar did not show.
Right. So you're saying that there are some routes and, for example, in and out of Japan, Latin America, which are generally more prone. So I have a slightly different question. One of the things that was attributed to this was the changing climate, with the symptoms of which, of course, we see elsewhere too. Is that something that you feel you too are seeing in either small or big ways anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, generally, although the whole pattern has changed in the past 15, 20 years, the weather has become more severe. The thunderstorms have become more severe. There is a general policy for every airline to avoid a thunderstorm by so many miles. So all these things, there has to be a new study which goes into it about the changing pattern of weather and how we tackle the weather, how much to deviate. For example, in the Middle East, even if there's a small cloud, it is very turbulent. The standard 15 miles separation that we keep or 20 miles is not enough. You have to keep more separation nowadays. And there is no official document which states this. It is out of your own experience. If you look at Indian monsoon, 15, 20 years back, monsoon used to be only rain, steady rain for lasting 2 or 3 days. But nowadays, it comes in bursts and it is associated with thunderstorms. Earlier, there were no thunderstorms in monsoon. It was just moisture and rain. So now it has changed to thunderstorms embedded in rain. So the whole pattern has changed and you have a wet spell, then dry spell. There has to be a comprehensive study in the weather pattern. This is because of climate change or whatever, but still the weather is becoming severe. So the pilots need to be updated in their knowledge to avoid these sort of thunderstorms, like not to overfly, not to take the risk of overflying, even if they think that they are well clear. Keep sufficient margins, safety margins.
Finally, your advice to the many frequent flyers who I'm sure are listening to this, what would you tell them given all of this?
See, turbulence can be associated with a number of issues. It could be a technical issue with the aircraft which moves the aircraft, or clear air turbulence which nobody can see, nobody can predict, or you have clouds which you cannot avoid. So always respect the seatbelt sign. When it is on, you have to have your seatbelts on. That is the only thing which will save you. Because what people don't realize is that in an aircraft, they're like a ping pong ball. If they have the seatbelts, they're secure. But if not, what happens in turbulence is that you are on the seat, the aircraft suddenly climbs or descends. It happens so fast that you remain stationary, the aircraft hits you. If you see the visuals, the ceiling hits you, and then again the aircraft climbs. So ceiling hits you, you get hurt on your head, you are pushed down, then the aircraft comes up, and then you go up again, hit the ceiling. So maximum injuries are in the head or in the spine. So only thing that can save you is your seatbelt. Even if it is clear, if you're resting, whatever, seatbelt has to be on. Unless, of course, you have to move for whatever reason to go to the toilet or stretch your legs once in a while. But the safest way is to keep your seatbelts on, even if it is slightly loose for comfort's sake.
Captain Singh, that's very useful. Thank you so much for your insights and joining me.
Thank you very much.
That was the Core Report with me, Govindraj Ethiraj. Do stay connected with more of our coverage at the Core. You can check out our website or sign up to our newsletter for our exclusive stories, one in-depth feature a day on www.thecore.in. Do also track us on LinkedIn, where we usually post synopses or extracts of our top stories and interviews. We would love your feedback on how we can make business more interesting and relevant, including, of course, India's vibrant manufacturing sector. So write to us at feedback@thecore.in, and thank you once again for listening.